The Peloponnesian War is the quintessential event that defined and demonstrated the most extreme characteristics of the classical Greek world. After the defeat of the Persians, both Athens and Sparta began to consolidate power over leagues of anti-Persian city-states. The Athenian-led Delian League was a coalition of Greek city-states around the Aegean Sea, who paid tribute to Athens to build and maintain a massive fleet of over 300 triremes. This state-of-the-art technology of the day was each manned by 170 professional oarsmen, instead of the typical slaves used in many other city-states. 15 deckhands and other crewmen were also on the ship, as well as 15 to 40 marine hoplites and archers. The outbreak of the Peloponnesian War was due to Athenian westward ambitions, rather than the transformation of the Athenian tributary allies into vassal states in the Aegean. Athenian ambitions for controlling trade in the west was mainly at the expense of Corinth, a maritime city who had previously dominated Greek trade in the western Mediterranean. In 459 BC, the Athenians openly intervened on the side of a smaller city-state of Megara against Corinth. During the First Peloponnesian War, Athens primarily fought Corinth and Thebes to her immediate northwest. Sparta was reluctant to fight Athens, although they did defeat Athens in one undecisive pitched battle. By the end of the conflict, Megara was eventually retaken by the Peloponnesian League, and there was no significant territorial changes between the belligerents. One lasting effect of this war was the rebuilding of Athens' walls, which the Spartans had opposed, on the grounds that the Persians could have used it as a base of operations if they were to invade Greece again. This expansive structure encompassed not only the entire city of Athens, but connected it in a long causeway to the port city of Piraeus, which could supply Athens in the case of a siege. This war ended with the optimistically named 30 Years' Peace between Athens and Sparta, although Athens never fully ceased her hostilities towards Corinth, inciting rebellion in Corinthian colonies and eventually directly attacking her fleets. Corinth, along with Thebes, lobbied a reluctant Sparta to declare all-out war against Athens, which they did in 431 BC. The first phase of the Second Peloponnesian War, commonly referred to as simply the Peloponnesian War, is known as the Archidamian War, after one of Sparta's two concurrently ruling kings, as was their tradition. This phase saw the Spartan army invade the Athenian homeland of Attica every year, while the Corinthian navy attempted to break out of the Gulf of Corinth, defeated multiple times by the Athenian admiral Phormio, effectively cutting off the Peloponnesian peninsula from outside trade. As Sparta pursued the ineffectual strategy of pillaging the countryside, destroying as much farmland as possible in their yearly invasion of Attica, attempting in vain to provoke the Athenians into abandoning their walls, and giving the Spartans a pitched battle that both sides were confident Sparta would win, the Athenian rural population, along with their flocks and herds, crowded into the city and between the Athenian long walls that safeguarded access to seaborne supplies. The Athenian merchant fleet and chain of bases guaranteed a continuous flow of wheat from Egypt and particularly the Black Sea region, where Athens had several colonies. The overcrowding in the city made it the perfect place for disease to spread, and after a plague-tainted grain arrived in the city, it spread like wildfire, and 4 out of 10 Athenians died, and perhaps as high as 2/3 of the population, including Pericles, the Athenian statesman most responsible for Athens' expansionist ideology and strategy against Sparta. Pericles' sons also succumbed to the plague, and mercenaries refused to fight for Athens. Even the Spartans ceased operations in Attica for fear of catching the plague. Ironically, the Athenian blockade of the Peloponnese protected her enemies from receiving any plague-tainted grain. Although some Athenians called for ending the war, by the plague's end, the Athenian resolve against Sparta strengthened, with the most radical and aggressive statesmen rising to prominence. A policy of increasing raids in the Peloponnese was supplemented by the construction of fortresses, where Spartan slaves that outnumbered them as much as 10 to 1 were encouraged to run away to and defect to the Athenian cause. Sparta was ruled by 2 royal families, with 2 kings concurrently ruling. While one would be on campaign with the army, the other governed at home. Unlike Athens, Sparta had no city walls. "Our shields are our walls, and the tips of our spears are borders," was a common Spartan saying. At the top of their society was full Spartan citizens who had passed the rigorous training that began when they were 7 years old. Many died during the harsh training, and even those that survived those many years were not guaranteed full membership if not voted into the membership of a barracks mess hall by the full Spartan citizens. A failed Spartan would live out the rest of his life as a second-class citizen, unable to vote. Also below the Spartans were the perioikoi, or those that live about. These were the workmen, blacksmiths, craftsmen, carpenters that made Spartan society function, and were also expected to fight along the Spartans when called to do so, forming a significant part of the Spartan army. They were the only people allowed to travel to other cities, which the Spartans were not allowed to do unless given permission, and lived separately from the Spartans in autonomous self-governing communities. Women also played an integral and significantly different role in Spartan society, compared to women in almost every other culture in the ancient world of their day. From a young age, they were fed the same protein-heavy diet of their Spartan citizen brethren, and exercise and competition in sports were mandatory. Marriage was illegal until the woman reached her late teens or early 20s to increase the odds of a healthy pregnancy. It is illuminating of the Spartan mindset that only those who died in war or died in childbirth were allowed to have their name written on their tombstone. Women were also taught how to read, write, use mathematics, and were allowed to personally own property on their own, separate from their husband, and were allowed to inherit their father's property. Because of this, Spartan women owned approximately a third of the land in Spartan-held territory, and dominated the markets for investments, goods, and slaves, as they were the highest-ranking members of their society allowed to do so. Because of their high standards of physical fitness and education, Spartan women were renowned throughout the Greek world, not only for their beauty but for their predilection for speaking their mind, much to the shock and curiosity of other Greeks. At the bottom of Spartan society were the helots, slaves that outnumbered Spartan citizens more than 10 to 1. Their peculiar form of slavery differed from that of other Greek city-states in several significant ways. First, they were allowed to marry whom they wished amongst themselves, have a family, and keep a portion of the fruits of their own labor, and live comparatively comfortable lives in their own homes. Secondly, the Spartans declared ritual war on the helots once a year, where Spartans could kill any helot they wanted without any repercussions or inquiry. Helots who were particularly charismatic, tall, good-looking, or stood out in any way that might make him a potential leader were murdered. Thirdly, the helots were fellow Greeks, whom the Spartans had conquered. This fact appalled the Athenians, who had a significant portion of their city's population enslaved as well, although they were foreign non-Greeks, who they viewed as near subhuman. In 425 BC, a minor engagement would have a significant effect on the war. After a small band of 440 Peloponnesian soldiers were stranded on the small flat island of Sphactria off the east coast of the Peloponnese, blockaded by Athenian ships manned by 11,000 men including 3,000 soldiers, who prevented them from leaving the island, and continually pelted the entrenched and starving Spartans with arrows. 229 Peloponnesians surrendered, including 120 Spartan hoplites. This sent shockwaves through the Greek world, and was a huge boost to the morale of the Athenian plague survivors, who threatened to kill the Spartan captives if the Spartans continued to raid Attica. The Spartans withdrew. This gave the Athenians a short-lived sense of false dominance, and they subsequently lost battles at Delian and at Amphipolis, where the Athenians engaged a slightly larger Spartan force. After this, both war-weary sides negotiated the so-called 50-year Peace of Nicias, with nearly all land taken from either side returned, which was mostly a few small border cities and towns, and the captured Spartans were returned home. The Peace of Nicias was soon ignored by both sides, and began raiding each other's territory soon after. During the inaccurately named period of peace, the Spartans defeated an alliance of Athens, Argos, and Arcadians, who had switched sides to fight alongside the Athenians at the Battle of Mantinea. If the Spartans had lost this battle, with a significant percentage of their citizen hoplites engaged, it would have surely meant a defeat for Sparta and ended the war. They subsequently put down the democracy movements that Athens sought to aid, and re-established their dominance throughout the Peloponnese, and the significant power of Argos joined the Spartan cause. The debacle at Mantinea was masterminded by the young Athenian rabble-rouser Alcibiades, who had grown up in the house of Pericles. Even after this, the charismatic young man remained wildly popular with the Athenian citizens. And when he proposed a plan to invade Sicily and conquer the fabulously wealthy city-state of Syracuse, people overwhelmingly supported him, disregarding the warnings of Nicias, who had previously negotiated the peace with Sparta. Syracuse's population were ethnic Dorians, as the Spartans were, who were at war with Ionian Greeks on the island, who were distantly related to the Athenians. Under the pretext of aiding their brethren, the massive expedition was deployed to aid them. However, soon before the expedition set sail, statues of the god Hermes were mutilated throughout the city. The enemies of Alcibiades blamed him. He demanded an immediate trial, as this was the height of his popularity, but his enemies postponed the trial. After setting sail for Sicily, other charges were brought against him, and a ship was sent to inform him of these charges and bring him back for trial. While returning home, following the ship that had informed him of the trial, he escaped and defected to Sparta. The Sicilian expedition ended in a disaster. Athens lost more than 10,000 hoplites, who were all either killed, captured, or enslaved, 2/3 of her navy, and 30,000 professional oarsmen. Ships could be rebuilt, but the highly skilled oarsmen were irreplaceable. While in Spartan service, Alcibiades informed his new masters of the Athenian strategy and how to exploit it. Most significantly, he advised the Spartans to build a fortification near Athens, where they could be raided year-round. This allowed Sparta to cut off their silver supply and free 20,000 Athenian slaves from the mines. Alcibiades soon fell out of favor because of messing with the wrong person's wife, the Spartan king, and defected to the Persians, who had been supplied in Sparta with aid as they viewed Athenian imperial ambitions as the greater threat. During the final phase of the war, sometime referred to as the Second War, Delian, or Ionian War, Alcibiades somehow managed to talk his way back into Athens, and in 410 BC commanded an Athenian fleet to a decisive victory over a combined Persian and Spartan naval force near the Hellespont in modern-day Turkey. After Sparta suffered defeat after defeat at sea, the brilliant Spartan navarch, or leader of ships, or admiral, Lysander, had learned much from the Athenians, and inflicted a decisive naval defeat on the Athenians at Nautium in 406. The final coup de grace came in 405 BC, when Lysander defeated the Athenians at Aegospotami. The Spartan navy was then able to effectively cut off Athens from grain shipments, and as the city began to starve, they surrendered, ending the war. Ironically, it was not the famed Spartan hoplites, but her navy that was second-rate, and little to non-existent for much of the war that secured Sparta victory. Sparta's tenure as leader of the Greek world was short-lived and chaotic, with failed attempts to install oligarchies to replace democracies, and simply far too few Spartan homoioi to control the Aegean world. And after a crushing defeat in the Spartan-Theban War, the Spartans withdrew to their homeland, never again to be a major power. This left the Greek city-states vulnerable to Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, who conquered the Greek world, sparing Sparta. This has been Epimetheus, and I hope you enjoyed this longer version of the video I made on the Peloponnesian War. A couple of the books I used for this video that I'd recommend would be the Ancient Greece. Paul Cartilage is very good. He also wrote the Spartans, which I think this is pretty inexpensive on Amazon. You can get that. It's a really good book. And there's the always excellent Osprey books. There's the Spartan Army and the Ancient Greeks. There's also Atlas of the Greek World that is really quite good.